Good, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, thank you, Libby. Just so everybody knows, I started Pro Financial Fitness just a little over 3 years ago. I'm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I've lived here in North Carolina now for a little over 30 years. I'm originally from the Washington, D.C. area. Um, and I came here as an accountant in the university world and how I got to UNC Chapel Hill. In 2001, I was already married. My wife and I already had one child, and I felt I needed to I told my wife I need to find a new world to work in, but I said, I don't know what that is. And I just started applying for jobs, and it turns out there was a nonprofit here in Durham, North Carolina that still exists, but they needed someone like me with financial accounting background from universities because there were a combination of Duke University, UNC Chapel Hill, and North Carolina Central, where some of those universities paid for the staff, like the legal person for the organization was paid for by North Carolina Central because of their great law school. The medical people came from Duke and UNC. So that's how I got into the nonprofit world. And I've worked here. My little phrase I give people is that I've been anywhere from a part time, bottom of the totem pole, part time bookkeeper to one of my jobs. We jokingly call myself a one person financial show because I did anything and everything, including payroll and HR, to leading three nonprofits, including one that I had started 20 years ago. And I've been on multiple boards, and I'm currently on one till the end of this calendar year. So when 2020 came around, my whole world was turned upside down in a variety of ways, and it led me to starting this business. So yes, I currently, if I tell people, if you're interested, you can. I always do free consultations just to talk to people and free answer questions for an hour. So anytime you just want some thoughts, you want to get some question answered, that's fine. We can always talk about other stuff later on down the line, or even to expand into your state, etc. Um, but yeah, today, one of the things, and actually, like I said, you guys are getting this like a free training today. This is normally something I would charge for. So you guys are lucky that you're here to see this. If you know anybody that would need this, whether I can do all this as we're doing online right now. But we're going to talk about, like I said, Board of Directors 101. And here, like I said, understand the legal duties of board members, understand the various roles of board members, and understand some practical notes about being a board member, what to do and what not to do. And again, you can always, it's like probably best it is write down if you have questions, you can start putting in the chat and stuff like that, and we'll try to answer it right at the end. All right. So the first part of this is, like I said, talking about today's nonprofit board. And one of the two biggest things, like I said, is like I said, that we always, and some of you know this already, that the nonprofit board is really the uh, legally group that's responsible for any nonprofit. But we also say socially, okay, because these are some, like I said, people that are usually depending on your nonprofit. I've seen nonprofits that they have working boards, they're making all the decisions, to some boards that are really have places have staff and they're just sort of helping to guide the organization. But they also really can be the whole social person out there in the world to constantly talk about their organization. That's one of like their responsibilities is to do that. And we always say good stewards of the resources is that, you know, if they feel you're bringing in a whole lot of income, way more than your expenses, then they may say, hey, they may tell the executive director, we'd love for you to like try to do more fundraising with this money. They may want you to invest it in, you know, staff. They may want you to invest it in buildings. They may want to invest to tell you, hey, do more, go hire a social media person. Um, or you know, it could be, you know, something else, help take care of your employees more, whatever it is. And then, like I said, you guys try to carry it out. But yes, they are trying to help you, at least in basic ways, to try to help you manage the money. All
And
right, so yes.
Mark,
Yep.
you extend your PowerPoint out, so put it out to a slideshow more so we can see it. Put it in a
Oh, okay,
slideshow. There you go. Thank you.
there we go. Okay, yep. All right. Yeah. So the highest purpose, of course, in the nonprofit world is right to act for the good of others, and that's usually, like I said, you start finding people in the world that want to help others, want to assist others, want to make the world a better place. Um, and usually, like I said, you started in your community. Um, Everything usually starts very local, whether you're a national or international nonprofit, or just even for your town or your city or county. Everything usually always starts on a local type basis. Um, and here's a little note that's, like I said, in parentheses, because you're serving the public, is that your public is really your boss in a sense. So that's who you're trying to do this for. This is why that places can get access to your information, because it's really like you're working for your community. And I think technically, if we always keep that in mind, we recognize that way. Hopefully, as boards, you're making good decisions, and again, thinking of the general public and what you're trying to do. All right. And also, again, it's to, when everybody talks about their mission, and sometimes your mission can get lost in the general day to day work, but it's to always constantly like come back um, to that. And this is where just I'll add a little note in for this is like, if your organization either is not good at fundraising, or everyone forgets about their mission and you just try to do things all the time, these are things that sometimes I always say is put the first thing in as the agenda item in your like maybe next board meeting, and potentially you might keep that item talking about your mission statement. What are we really doing for our mission statement? um, and to get people focused back on the nonprofit. And sometimes as we get all caught up in the world and doing all these worldly things. So if something in your nonprofit seems to have been forgotten about or just innocently forgotten about, then like I said, maybe make that as a part of the number one thing in your it could even be having somebody read your mission statement just at the beginning of your board meeting, to constantly keep that in people's minds, because that these are the things that people should be able to communicate, like your mission and vision, um, even if it's not exactly the way it's worded, like on the website or something like that, or in your documents, but that people should have a basic idea of what it is when people say, "What's your mission?" And as a board member, you should say, "Oh, I don't know exactly," but and if anything, just like any question that's asked you or your board, if they don't answer, usually just the best thing to say is, "I don't know, but I'll find out." All right. So when it comes to like I said, this is part of the legal part of the duties, and this is where again sometimes we can get so caught up in what we're trying to do at a nonprofit that we forget about these things. So, and this helps you define. I think when you're talking about trying to find new board members, these are some of the things to think about, right? And to even talk to the person that you're potentially trying to recruit. Like the first one, duty of care is, can they attend meetings regularly most of the time? Are they diligent? Are they on time? Are they engaged somehow? Do you feel like this person, you even could ask them, do you feel you're a good person that can talk about the mission and vision and some of the activities we're doing? These are some great things I think to try to analyze people on. So being that duty of care is like number one, and duty of loyalty, that type of thing is you technically probably don't want somebody that's already on two or three boards like already, unless they feel they can manage that time. You want someone that's going to be really loyal towards what you're doing. All right. Um, And here's another little thing that I've added in, like I said, and putting the organization interest before your personal interest. So sometimes places want to pay another board member, like for like somebody might have an IT company, and you want to pay their IT company just because you know them, um, and uh, and you feel like, hey, let's use their IT company as our IT company. Maybe you can get a better deal on them with prices or something like that. But you always, like I said, you want to look at everything in terms of what I call a conflict of interest. and have that person, if you're going to vote even on using that board member's company, that person, like I said, recuses themselves from the votes. Um, so they're not a part of the conflict of interest, that they're not voting yes to be a part of my own company, and also someone that's going to hold information in confidence. Usually I see this from nonprofits. They're very, very protective of their clients. They're very protective of their information. You're always trying to, a lot of times, prevent the whole world from knowing who you're dealing with. You're not trying to put anybody in danger, of course, and that's why you're trying to protect your clients. But so people understand that, even if they're telling a story, that they're telling a story in a very general way, and not letting out people's names and other things exactly if stuff is. If places have shelters, the idea is you're not typically trying to give out the address of where that shelter is, because again, you're trying to take care of your clients or so. Um, the next one of obedience. And this is where, like I said, that when we talk about obey lawful acts in relation to the organization. And so I'm going to stop right there, give another like little nugget type of thing is, in terms of your board members, I always, for many years, and this is just from my experience of working in nonprofits, was to say you always wanted a legal person on your board, and you also wanted like an accountant or somebody at least that works at a bank or something that knows numbers and can understand financial reports. um, you can find a variety of people to do these things. And of course, what you're also doing is really looking at what you're doing. Like one person mentioned they were trying to deal with somebody in the Philippines. It really, in a sense, to me, what came to mind is that you probably want somebody, if you don't already have someone from the Philippines on your board where you're working at, then that's like what you would want. Somebody that's, when you talk about helping people find jobs, right? It could be someone that either works at one of those government agencies, usually within your state, that has the places where people come to, like a Department of Labor type thing, and they have these offices that people come to look for work when they're out of work. So, in a sense, you're always looking at what you're doing, and who the type of person you're helping. And you might need a social worker on your board, just a variety. We talk about having a soup kitchen. One thing could be to have somebody on your board that maybe they're current chef or a retired chef, or just somebody that really is maybe in your community that's a really great cook that you know of. So it's a lot of times looking at what you're doing, so these individuals can just even be a part of your organization in one shape or form, and they can focus on what their knowledge base is, what they're good at, what their skill sets at. But usually I said legal, because here's the thing, and a lot of times when organizations are doing stuff, is that decisions are made all the time, usually by non-legal people. And it isn't until you talk to someone in the legal world that they'll say, you know what, you really can't do that. And you go, oh, wow, I never knew that. So these are the things a lot of times, even as boards mention things, is that it's always good if you have somebody on your board. And if you don't, you might, like I said, if you can have advisory people, you can have advisory committees. Um, and maybe those might be your legal person. That way, at least once you decide something, you can bounce the idea off someone that's not a board member, but is willing to say, I'll answer every legal question that you have. Um, so it's good to always have these people, at least if they're not on your board, to be on advisory, or at least be willing to say, call me anytime you have a question like that. All right. So the work of the board here, number 4 here, um, is we talk about like board operations, right? So this is where, like I said, it said create the composition and be in charge of board recruitment. So this is where you can have different type of committees on your board. One of them probably should be like a board recruitment committee, where as long as you identify what type of people you want, then this committee can be hopefully more than one person that can like go and constantly be looking for people in your community, or even if it's national or something. Right. You also want to have, probably, if you don't already have, information on like orientation for board members, and usually a lot of places start out without anything. But if you can put some type of little booklet together, it might be a Microsoft Word document, um, that is going to try to explain some of the things about your organization, explain what they might do the first 3 to 6 months or even the first year that they're on the board, to get them up to date as fast as possible, give them something to read. And also we also talk about structure, in which that, um, again, when you're trying to figure out, reconstruct your board, is what do you want that to look like? And so you can create, maybe you want to create little like organizational charts in a sense, whether it's under the committees, even in your boards, to think of many different ways that you want people to interact with your thing. And it's almost like what you think of as big business. They have all these different departments, right? So that's what you sometimes can start thinking about for your nonprofit, is even at the board level and committee level, you can have a lot of different departments. And that way people don't feel like they have to do every single part of all this board work. All right. We talk about next thing, strategic planning, again, to partner with the executive director. The general idea, when I tell all the people, again, I've seen boards that are working boards. I've seen people that are 15 and 20 years old. Boards are still making every imaginable decision in what they're doing. And then a lot of times they don't have staff, etc. Um, but the general idea, would be more for, like, I tell, for example, is the board makes a decision that they want the nonprofit to fundraise or do a golf fundraiser or do a year-end event and bring their clients in to speak or whatever it is, that they make that type of decision and just say, we approve that. And then usually that idea then gets passed on to the executive director, and to say, executive director, this is what we want: a year-end event. We want a fundraising, a golf thing in the spring or summer or fall. etc. And then the executive director would then carry that out. Usually, you said, with the staff, and this is where, if you have a larger organization, um, but at least with that, the executive director can at least start planning and start thinking about things and coming up with ideas. And if they feel there's no like staff around and they need the board to do the work, then at least they can start coming back to the board and say, hey, to put on this golf event or this type of year-end event or something, like, here's what I finally have recognized. And those directors, if you know anybody, again, can do an hour consultation for me with free, just to get some ideas of what they might need to do. And then they could come back to their board and say, hey, I need 3 of you or 4 of you or something like that on the board to work with me on putting this event together. But usually, a lot of times, the boards, in a traditional way, the boards are not involved with having to carry out all this work. But we know in many places the board members have to help out, and that's where the executive director comes back to the board and say, hey, I need 3 or 4 people. Again,
Mark,
research
I'm
and
gonna stop
development.
you because you have a question on the board. So if you want to answer that question that's up. Question was, in there said they don't want to make,
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. That's a good thing. Right. Um that is, you're right, usually true. I would, like I said, probably contact your Secretary of State's office in your state and just verify that. I think that is true, even though this is where, and if that is true for your state, that's where you could probably again ask this person, if it's in the Philippines or something outside the country, to be a little bit more of an advisor for that. So yes, thank you for that question. But um, let's see, yes, you're right. You have a dozen, right? All right. But a lot of, now to the resource development there. This is where, without the board physically trying to carry out their work. And again, I understand there's a lot of boards that have to seem like to do everything. But again, back to what we would think of as how, when boards were created, they're supposed to try to be out there trying to, not necessarily trying to find grants. They can give you potential grants to apply for. But they would probably be more in the community, talking to the community, talking to corporations, talking to small businesses, talking to individuals, talking to churches, etc., and trying to round up these people, even if the final decision has to be made from this person talking to the executive director or something like that. But they're trying to be the proponent try to explain to them, here, we've given our director to do all these wonderful things, but we need the money to do all these wonderful things. They should be out there saying that. Again, and volunteers, in terms of especially volunteers to look for that. Um, and then in terms of like physical, it might be you guys need a physical space, whether you get it for free, like if you're doing a, some type of special thing that you're going to do a training or stuff, that they need to help you find buildings to partner with, commercial real estate owners. But it could be maybe if your organization is going to eventually own a home or own a building, that they need to be out there looking for the things that that the organization needs. And again, we talk about oversight. And again, this is where the even the committees, talk about program committees. That's one thing that sometimes you're trying to do all the program stuff yourself. But if you can get a committee to talk about everything and program related stuff, then you can, that's going to, that be helpful. And then there can be more conversation about what issues or stumbling blocks or roadblocks that the executive director is running into to carry out your programs, and what your or what things are working perfectly fine. That's what everybody wants to know. Um, and again, be what you call an ambassador. Again, you're trying to, like I said, advocate for the mission of the organization, and you're enhancing, we say, enhance public speaking. You're trying to open doors for the executive director and be a spokesperson for the organization. Um, and so that's a great, like I said, to be just this friendly person to say, as a board member, we love this organization, we love our director, we love our programs, on and on and on, and to help put a greater light on your organizations, because I've seen places go downhill quickly because of situations that's happened. Let's see, where was I'm trying to think. I have to use my mouse here. Yep. So again, good board members attend and actively participate in meetings, special events, etc. They come prepared for the meetings. I know there's many people that feel they don't have time to read the minutes before the meeting. I've been guilty of that, and sometimes even a part of the groups I've been a part of. But if people do have time, they hopefully need to review all these reports that go out before these board meetings. And again, try to think strategically and generatively for an organization. Speak up on any legal or ethical concerns. Be those ambassadors, and also make a contribution. Here's a little dynamic in terms of even some of these grant proposals that people ask. And it's also related to, if like when I was a part of Granville County Habitat for Humanity, I told the board that if you're trying to raise $60,000, if each of you put in $1,000, we start out the campaign with $10,000 in our pocket. And then you can tell everyone that every board member has made a donation. Now, understandably, we know that not everyone can do that, but um, even if people can make even just a $5 or $10 donation per year, that's what you want. And even on grant proposals, back to that sometimes the question may be asked, what percentage of your board members has gives to your organization? And really, you honestly, what they want to see is they want to see 100%. They don't want to see 50%, 70%, 90%. They want to see 100%, because they feel, in terms of giving you money, if your board isn't already 100% invested, they're not really as concerned with you as they would if you were 100%. So whether you can get someone to give $1,000 a year or $1 or $5 a year, um, at least you could say, hey, 100% of our board members give. And I know that's always a sticky subject for places. Some people don't like to always ask that question, but if you get down to that question and you can't say 100%, like on a grant proposal, or if even you're trying to raise all this money and you can't say that 100% of your board have given so far this year or towards this special campaign, you may want to like stop your campaign and get all your board members, even just to give you a buck, hand them a buck out of their wallet, or even a penny, and at least you can say 100% and go back to your campaign and go back to your grant proposal. All right. And the other part, yes, is to, you may, if you don't already have a database or a spreadsheet to keep all your donors in, and even have a campaign where you're trying to ask via email or via mail, to ask a once a year campaign. That's probably another thing to start thinking about if you're not already doing that. Usually people just start out with using spreadsheets to keep track of everything. And eventually maybe down the road, maybe years down the road, then you might say, now we're going to invest in like a donor management type system. And they're not always cheap, of course. Um, but but to try to do that. Um, yes, actually we talk about the biggest challenge there. That's actually even one of my trainings that I do. Um, that one of them is like how to get your board to fundraise. All right. So and I get it. I'm a type of person, sometimes I can be meek and mild and and I'm afraid to ask, and I've seen that at places as well. So I get it, and I think sometimes we ask people for money, the ones that we think will give, and we have a higher chance of trying to do that instead of I've even recognized I don't, I wouldn't even ask my parents or my brothers or sisters or something, or my wife, but because sometimes you're just not sure who's gonna give. But that's a separate training, right? That I do. That potentially, if you know any place that would wanna have that training, you can contact me about that. All right. And here we again we talk about the three hats of role clarity. Okay, it's governance, implementation, and volunteer. Okay, um, this is where um, we talk about the former part of governance is worn only in quorum if a quorum is present. Only if quorum is present. So that's where you could, like we always talk about, that you want at least your 50% of people coming to a meeting on the board, right? So that's when you're formally making decisions for the organizations. Um, and yes, the board is the ultimate legal and moral authority. That's where potentially there is what's called officers and directors insurance. That what that does is protect not only the four officers, like the president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary, but also the rest of the board that's on the board for decisions. That there was a story that some organization got sued like for $1 million, and they didn't have any board and officers insurance, and they lost the court case. And it turns out that each of the board members was then responsible for $100,000 that they had to come up with. And if they didn't already have that in cash in their banks, they had to go get a bank loan to pay this off. And then they had $100,000 bank loan to pay off the rest of their life. So, implementation, again, this we talk about, you delegate, is that um, it's only worn by a selective few when the board specifically gives authorization, right? You're trying to delegate something to a committee, you delegate something to an executive director. Um, and a lot of times the authorization is usually done by the board president to the executive director. That's usually how a lot of times, that's why I know when I was executive director, a lot of times I just dealt with the board president is who my thing was. Even though I could talk to the others, usually it dealt with in terms of having to understand that relationship. I dealt with the board president, right? And the volunteer one, like I said, is sort of that hat that's worn the most often. And no one person is actually, like I said, really an authority. That even when you're volunteering, you're sort of, even as a board member, you're trying to do what the executive director or other staff is doing. For example, at a Meals on Wheels program, you might have the volunteer coordinator in charge of all those meals getting packed. And if a board member comes in, even though you say, hey, this board member's higher up in the ranking, they're coming in like as a volunteer and listening to that volunteer director to explain how you pack those meal bags and stuff like that. That they're sort of, the volunteering part comes down that they're humbling themselves down there, and they're not really coming in and telling the volunteer coordinator or anybody else how to do all this type of work. All right. Um, all right. Related to division of responsibilities. Um, One of the things, like I said, is in terms of being focused, is that a lot of this has to do with what you call end results. It's why if someone says, hey, the board says we want to do an event, they're trying to just think of what type of results are going to come out of like a golf event or end of year event type of thing. They're just trying to focus on what is some of the pluses related to do that. And the executive director is more, you say, means, in senses they're the ones that are going to figure out how to carry that out. They're the ones to decide, not the board, to decide how all these things happen. All right. The questions to be addressed by the board is more like what, why, how much, how well, et cetera. When the executive director says, again, how, when, where, by whom, except to carry these things out. The board, again, talks about missions and goals and policies and standards, et cetera, where the executive director deals with strategies, procedures, et cetera, like that. Right. So the board, in a sense, under methods, you say boards vote on things and the executive director tries to recommend things. So they can recommend stuff to the board and the board can vote on it and maybe approve stuff like that. But the executive director isn't like in charge of making like every sort of organizational decision. And you do want to have as much trust between the board and the executive director. I tell people I was at a place where I had 10 board members and I felt like I had 10 bosses, which was tough for me. All right. So again, you look at the difference. The board of directors come up with a vision and the executive director carries out that vision. So you can see the differences in what they're doing. Let's get back to, let's see. And here in terms of fundraising is hard and grants are never a guarantee. I'm going to give you another little like nugget here. So a lot of times, and I did the same thing when I started a nonprofit. You think you go after big grants, that's where the big money is. And almost everybody tries to do that. Here's the example. When you look at a cake that's got frosting on it, right? And usually what happens is you see the cake part of it is the biggest part. And this is where people think, well, that's the big grant money. That's what's related to the big grant money. And the frosting is just some of your donations that make your organization look pretty. I tell people it's the complete opposite. I tell people is that the foundation of your organization really comes down to individual and maybe church and other type of donations that or fundraising things that you can do. It's really coming, that cake to me is the support from the community, and that the icing is then the grant money that just makes your organization look pretty. But you have a foundation of money that you're getting from the community. So in a sense, it's usually better for most places to start fundraising, start asking people for money, coming up with plans of how, and coming up with planning of how you go to a church or some other business or something like that to explain what you do. And as long as everyone's got their verbiage correctly, then potentially each of these board members could take that same message out to everybody um, to do that. So yes, it is hard. None of it is easy. But usually starting with just basic fundraising and donations is what you can do. So little tips, tricks, and ideas. Again, like I said, effective orientations of knowing what, when board members join, of what they're expected to do, what they're not expected to do. Like I always say something like this: mission typed at the top of all board meeting agendas to talk about that. Make your mission statement as an agenda item. Conduct meeting evaluations to see how people feel meetings went. Discuss any type of trainings and area to improve. Even in terms of fundraising, another example was the same thing: is put your fundraising idea as the first thing on your agenda at every board meeting, and you tell people it's a maximum maybe of 10 minutes or something like that. And if people have ideas, they bring those ideas during that 10 minutes, and then maybe it can go into a fundraising committee. But at least take those things and explain what's good happening, where you're getting donations from, where you're not getting donations from, what's easy, what's hard, et cetera, and finding people and places. But to use maybe the first 10 minutes of your board meeting just to talk about fundraising is a great little tip, just like any other part of just like talking about your mission or something like that. All right, so little notes here. The board of directors, right from the beginning, make every decision for the nonprofit organization, but when there is a staff, even unpaid staff, then they need to let the staff carry out the daily work. As board members, don't get into the weeds and the minutia. Okay. Now I understand that some places, like you said, they're working boards and they have to, but in general, this is part of, in a sense, the idea means even if you can't find staff, you don't have money for staff, is to then it becomes, like I said, a volunteer. And if you can get a volunteer to come in, you talk about a soup kitchen, someone to cook, someone to clean. If you think about the things that go on, or someone that's a retired person from working and they're going to sit and help people find jobs, that you find individual volunteers to start doing these things to the point that then the board can step out of doing all this. And again, I always, as I said before, having a legal person and an accounting individual, whether someone is CPA, MBA, master's in accounting, or even just a hardworking accountant on the board of directors to be the treasurer. A person that's good at public relations and fundraising. So sometimes it is hard to find the, fundraising people. If you know someone that loves to talk, they could be a great public relations person, and you feel they're a very convincing type person. In terms of even when you ask people to fundraise, to find who is that person that's maybe fundraised before, and they'll say, "Sure, I'll help you do that," And so you just keep asking that. Again, you need someone with leadership skills to be a chair and a vice chair. The vice chair is the easiest thing to do. Usually, you're not doing anything unless the chair is not around to run these meetings. And you do. I just ran a meeting at a community organization that I'm a part of for the first time ever, and I was thinking to myself, I've never done this before. I have no idea. But at the end, everyone actually, because I was trying to keep everyone on track and say, okay, if that's it, then too much discussion, we're moving on. And I'm not usually that forceful, aggressive person, but I was able to somehow control that meeting. And at the end, everyone said I did a great job, and I was like, that's wonderful. See, I can do things I never thought I could do. Um, a person that is good at taking notes, again, is needed to be that secretary. So find someone that is willing to do that. Um, and I've already sort of mentioned a little bit of my experiences as being like a board member and executive director. And I said, sometimes, yes, you are trying to walk a fine line. You're not trying to upset everybody. Um, but you do, have to try to eventually, if you have to feel you got to speak up, you got to speak up, and say something. Even if you're a staff person and you report to an executive director, or your executive director, you feel you got to talk to the board president. I had an issue one time where we found out that one of our employees was putting more hours on a time, helping another person put more hours on their timesheet, and I ended up having to address that staff person, and that person got really upset, and I eventually even had to go home and talk to the board president on a Friday night, and I said, "I think I have to, like, let this person go." And she says, "If that's what you feel, then that's what you do." So it's there's a lot of situations you can be put into, and I was like, I've never fired, like, anyone in my life, and I felt like I had to do that, and then get their keys back and stuff like that. So not everything, like I said, is always, perfect, but um, sometimes if you do things, you can do things and find out, I never thought that I could ever do that in my life, and I did it. And even though it is the only person I've ever had to let go in my life, I did come around with the courage to be able to do that type of stuff.